In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers cut their own tent open from the inside and ran out into a blizzard at 40 degrees below zero in their socks. Some had only one shoe. None of them were wearing coats. Hours later, all 9 were dead. Soviet investigators studied the case for months and reached a conclusion that changed nothing. The deaths were caused by a compelling natural force. They never said what that force was. 65 years later, neither can anyone else. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute. 9 of the 10 hikers were fellow students, all certified Grade 2 mountaineers preparing for the harder Grade 3 certification, the highest available in the Soviet Union. This wasn't a casual trip. It was a serious winter expedition across the northern Urals, aimed at a mountain called Otorten. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early because of joint pain. It was the decision that saved his life. On January 31st, the remaining 9 reached the base of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Shachel, a name often translated as Dead Mountain, long before any of this happened. The next day, a snowstorm cut their visibility to almost nothing. They lost the trail, drifted off course, and ended up climbing the wrong slope. Rather than descend to the shelter of the tree line, just over a mile away, Dyatlov made the call to make camp exactly where they stood, on the open, exposed face of the mountain. It was a small, practical decision. It would turn out to be the only decision anyone could point to afterward. Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram the moment the group returned to the last village, expected no later than February 12th. When the date passed with no word, nobody panicked right away. Delays were common on expeditions like this. But by February 20th, the families had heard nothing, and they demanded a search. Volunteers, then soldiers, then aircraft joined the effort, spreading out across a frozen, roadless wilderness, looking for any sign of 10 people who had simply stopped existing. On February 26th, a search party found the tent, half collapsed under snow on the slope of Kholat Shachel. It was empty. All of the group's boots, coats, and supplies were still inside, and it had been cut open, not from the outside, but from the inside, as if whoever was inside needed to get out faster than the entrance flap would allow. 9 sets of footprints led away from the tent, down toward the tree line. Some prints were in socks, some were bare, some belonged to a single shoe. After about 500 meters, the snow had drifted over the tracks completely, and they vanished. Following the footprints, searchers reached the edge of the forest, where they found the remains of a small fire under a large Siberian pine. Its lower branches were broken off up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed it, again and again, desperately looking back toward the camp they could no longer see. Beneath the tree lay the first 2 bodies, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, barefoot, dressed only in their underwear, in temperatures around -25 degrees. They had given away or lost almost every piece of clothing they had. Between the tree and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodan, scattered at increasing distances, each one found in a posture that suggested they had been trying to crawl or walk back toward the camp. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, though examiners didn't consider it fatal on its own. All 3, like the 2 under the tree, were ruled to have died of hypothermia. 5 bodies, 5 explanations that, on their own, almost made sense. Then the snow melted. It took more than 2 months to find the rest. On May 4th, the final 4 bodies were discovered under 4 meters of snow, in a ravine 75 meters deeper into the woods. Some of them were dressed in clothing that clearly hadn't belonged to them, cut from the coats of the 2 who had died first under the pine tree. Whoever was still alive at that point had been stripping the dead to keep the living warm. It meant that at least some of them had survived long enough to make that decision. The injuries on these 4 bodies were nothing like hypothermia. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had catastrophic skull damage. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both had severe chest fractures. The lead forensic examiner said the force required was comparable to a car crash, and yet none of them had any external wounds. No bruises consistent with a blow, no broken skin. It was as if their bodies had been crushed by immense pressure, evenly, from every direction at once, without anything ever touching them hard enough to break the surface. There was more. 2 of the 4 were missing their eyes. 1 was missing her tongue. Another had no eyebrows left at all. The official examiner blamed the 4 months the bodies had spent partly submerged in a running stream. Decomposition, scavengers, the current itself. Maybe that's exactly what happened. But it's also exactly the kind of detail that a case like this doesn't let go of, especially when the report that explained it away stayed sealed in a secret archive for the next 30 years. Then there was the radiation. Testing on one victim's clothing showed elevated levels of radioactivity, never fully explained. And on the night of the incident, a separate group of hikers camped 50 kilometers south reported glowing orange spheres moving through the sky. Similar sightings continued for weeks across the region, reported independently by meteorologists and military personnel. None of it made it into the original 1959 report. It surfaced only decades later, when witnesses who had stayed silent finally started talking. The official investigation closed in May 1959 with that one vague phrase: a compelling natural force. And the files vanished into a restricted archive. For decades, theories filled the silence. Local Mansi tribesmen were investigated and cleared. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints besides the hikers' own. Some pointed to a secret Soviet weapons test gone wrong. Others proposed infrasound, wind moving across the mountain's shape in a way that could trigger panic and nausea without anyone hearing a thing. Some blamed katabatic winds, sudden hurricane-force gusts rolling down the slope. And doctors have long known that late-stage hypothermia victims sometimes rip off their own clothes, a real documented phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, which could explain the missing coats, but not everything else. In February 2019, 60 years after the deaths, Russian authorities reopened the case, but limited the investigation to just 3 possibilities: an avalanche, a slab avalanche, or a hurricane. In 2020, officials announced their conclusion. A slab avalanche had most likely forced the group to flee in the dark, in a panic, with almost no warning. A senior prosecutor called it a heroic struggle, not a chaotic one. The hikers, he said, did everything right and still had no chance. A 2021 study by Swiss researchers at ETH Zurich and EPFL modeled exactly how such a slab could form on that slope and produce injuries like these without leaving a mark on the snow by morning. In 2024, researchers went back to Kholat Syakhl in the same dangerous winter conditions and filmed real slab avalanches releasing on the slopes just above where the tent once stood. The first direct video evidence that it could happen there at all. And yet relatives of the hikers, through their lawyer, are still formally demanding the case be fully reopened, unsatisfied that 6 decades of secrecy can be closed with one scientific model. Maybe it really was just snow, physics, and terrible luck. Or maybe the official file still isn't telling the whole story. What do you think really happened on that mountain? Some mysteries refuse to die.